Hello, everybody. Good morning on this beginning of the week, or good afternoon, depending on where you are at. Um, this is the Successful as Fuck live stream. I'm your host, Raya Gonzalez, and I am super pumped today to have Travis Sackett with us. Travis is a very accomplished author and also, like myself, is willing to put his shit on blast so that others can hopefully take something from it and learn lessons from our mistakes and be inspired by the things that have helped pull us up out of a difficult time. So, Travis, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you for having me on this morning. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, Travis and I met through the book program that I'm in. He published his book through New Degree Press, which is the publishing house that I'm publishing my book, Successful as Fuck, which is coming out in September of this year. I will plug it before and I will plug it after, but please find Travis's book, My Life with Karma, on Amazon and buy it today. It's an amazing story that he tells, and it's worthy of checking out. It's also available in Kindle if you prefer your books electronically. But Travis, this show we talk about success and our changing definitions of success and the adversity that happens kind of in the sandwich in between. So why don't you start us out with a little bit of your story of before your large adversity? Where were you at and what was important and what was success to you then?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. So essentially, I was a dignitary protection officer. I used to protect one of Wisconsin's governors. So I was in law enforcement. And basically, at that time, what success looked like to me was climbing up the corporate ladder. Like I knew I was starting as least senior on our unit. So I was working everyone's off days, pretty much all three shifts in the same week and really just burning the candle at both ends to try to make a name for myself in the field. Um, Pretty much everything I did was geared toward work and just really kind of bettering my place there and trying to get in a position where one day either I could be a sergeant or even eventually a lieutenant. So success to me was very macro all around what work kind of presented and what that looked like to the bigger picture of my life.
Yeah, and then sorry, I don't know why we're getting a little bit of feedback. I apologize for that. I think you had mentioned too that you were doing a lot physically too, in terms of really pushing yourself to some higher levels of fitness that you'd never done before.
Yeah, that's true. I forgot to mention that. I was also really big into powerlifting. I had qualified for Worlds after winning a regional powerlifting tournament. So outside of work, pretty much like you said, always pushing myself in the gym, never settling for what I would consider to be like my personal best, always trying to just hit that next level. Trying to basically be the best version of myself every day that I could when I was in the gym.
I can 100% relate to that, and I think that we have. There's many people who've experienced that as well. So, um, tell me a little bit about how things started to unravel for you with that.
Sure. So while I was powerlifting, I suffered an injury and I ended up injuring L4 and L5 on my back, herniated two discs, and it looked like one was about to rupture. So I ended up going to a doctor and getting a prescription for Oxycontin. At first, I had no problems with the Oxy. I went through the first 30 days as prescribed, and really it helped. I'm not gonna lie. It basically made me feel no pain. I was able to still go into the gym, lift about 85% of what I was lifting before the injury, and I considered that a win. I looked at that like, okay, I'm still going to be able to go on, perform at Worlds, maybe not to the level I wanted to, but I thought I could still make it with the Oxy in my system. Um, so that being said, I put off seeing a specialist, ended up getting 90 more days of the Oxycontin, and that's where I started to have problems with the drug.
Mm.
I developed a very intimate relationship with it where I was clock watching daily, always waiting until I could take my next dose. And then eventually it got to the point where I was no longer able to wait the 3 to 4 hours between dosages. And I was taking it about every 1 to 2 hours, blowing through scripts in about half the time that they were allotted for, and just really craving the drug. From the time that I went to bed until I got up, constantly just thinking when I was able to take my next pill, what that would look like, how much better I would feel once that was in my system, and really just becoming reliant on a drug for everything. It also seemed to help with my anxiety, which was like an added bonus because when I was taking the oxy, my anxiety went away. I wasn't feeling that kind of daily pressure that I had, or that pressure to perform while I was on the medication. So it did a little bit in the mental health picture for me, which made it that much more dangerous.
How did it affect you at work when you were having this happen? How did that, because you were on a trajectory of like climbing at work. So what did that look like while you were going through this in the workplace?
Sure. It began with performance issues, just in terms of inconsistency. Like one day I would be close to my best and basically turn out the work that was expected of me. The next day I would completely struggle. Basically be in pain 95% of my day and really only be focused on the medication. And like I said, when I could take it next and what that looked like for me. And pretty much my work fell off. That was the first kind of warning flag, was inconsistency in my work. Then eventually, when I could no longer afford my medication, I began stealing. Now, obviously, that puts me in direct conflict with my work, being in law enforcement. So all of a sudden, I was doing something that was completely polar opposite of my morals, of everything that I stood for, everything the badge stood for, basically to feed my need to take a pill each day. And that's when my work completely tanked before I was arrested.
And you had some interpersonal friction too with this as well, right? I mean, you had you were married at the time, and did you have family as well?
I was married. We didn't have a family. We had, well, eventually 2 dogs and a horse.
That's a family.
So, yeah, there you go.
Well, I mean, that's gotta be hard to keep it. So you're keeping it a secret basically from yourself because you're in denial. You're
Yep.
keeping it a secret from your work because you're doing things you're using and you're stealing, and then you're also having to kind of hold it down so that your spouse doesn't know that things like this are happening, so that everything looks like the picture it was before everything happened. So that must have been really, really hard.
It was. I was constantly putting on a facade, like always a different face for a different person. Really just lost my true sense of self completely. Just because I was trying to play so many different roles with so many people, and also trying to keep all the stories that I was telling people straight. I
Yeah.
mean, there was so much lying and so much deception to cover everything up, that it was very difficult to even kind of navigate what the truth was at some point in times, because it became so blurred. It was like what I was doing became such an issue that I couldn't share with anyone. I couldn't disclose to anyone, that all of a sudden I started making up these false narratives that I would tell myself and other people, pretty much to just protect the disease and protect the illness of addiction.
Yeah. I think, how did they hold on one second. Sorry. This is why it's live. Just like go with it. I'm not sure if it's on my end or whatnot, but I'm gonna switch microphone source.
Okay.
Let's see if this helps with that a little bit. So we're good. Um, So how did things come to a head for you? So you're in this race basically against time because the drug is losing its effectiveness and it's wearing out of your system faster and faster. You can't get enough of the medication by regular standards. So you're having to go outside of the medical system to get the medication. You're hanging by a thread at home and keeping the facade there, and you're trying really hard to do everything at work that you can to hold on to that. Tell me about how things kind of came to a head for you.
Well, everything eventually just crumbled. One day I was called into work. Well, I went into work just like every other day, and I was called into my lieutenant's office immediately. And once I got in there, he had me sit down, and there were two city officers along with what I assumed was a plainclothes detective. And essentially, they asked me, "Do you know why you're here?" And immediately I lied and said, no, I have no idea. And I mean, obviously that wasn't the truth. I figured it had something to do with my theft to support my habit. And that was the case. They dropped it down a file folder about 1 to 2 inches thick and said, hey, we've been tracking what you've been doing. We know you're involved with stealing credit card information from the gym where you work out. And essentially, we intend to prosecute. They wanted to know if I had anything to pretty much say in my defense or if I could tell them who else was involved. And I I refused to do that. I said, I need to talk to an attorney. And essentially that was it for me. I was immediately placed under arrest at work, taken out in my uniform in handcuffs in front of all the whole department had pretty much gathered to see what was going on. So all the first shift officers got to see me taken out into a squad and taken to the jail where it was the same county where I had worked as an officer. So I was booked and released from Dane County Jail that same day.
Well, I mean, I can't imagine what that would feel like because I think anyone going through that situation would have fear and feel resigned, maybe even like a smidge relieved that you didn't have to hide it anymore. But really, I think that the thing that makes it even more so is that you had to go through all of those things in front of your peers who were also law enforcement, who stood for what you also stood for, and the heart of you stands for, and stood for in that moment, which was, upholding the law, but you were, slave to your disease at that time. And so, yeah, I just think that it would be exceptionally hard in that instant. I think it's hard for everyone, but I think it would be exceptionally hard in that instance. Does that sound about like what you were feeling at that time?
It does, and I'll just a full disclosure, suicide was also in my thoughts at that time, just because everything was blown up. My career was blown up. I knew my home life was going to be blown up. I didn't know if I'd have the support of my spouse or not. It ended up I didn't have the support of my spouse, but either way, I really didn't see an avenue that I could pick up all these pieces. I
Right.
thought I had blown things up to a degree that it would never be repaired, and basically my life, I looked at it like it was going to stay in shambles, which fortunately wasn't the case. But at the time, that's what it felt like. It didn't feel like there was any kind of relief, any way out of my situation aside from taking my own life.
How did you keep going after you were released? How did you hold on long enough to start to see that there might be another option for you, another way that could happen? What was it in the early days, and then what sustained that for you?
Well, getting into treatment, like, almost immediately was one of the things that kept me from, I would say, from taking my life, kept me at least hopeful enough that there could be a change. I didn't necessarily buy into treatment right away. I was kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out, but hearing other people's success stories and just having them share, like, okay, I was once in a similar situation, even though it kind of seemed like no situation was that similar to
Right.
mine. It it gave me enough hope that I was like, okay, maybe I can pick some of this up and assemble some sort of normal life at some point in time. I had no idea how long that was going to take. So basically, I took it not even a day at a time. I took it hour by hour, basically trying to deal with my mental health and then also trying to deal with the pain aspect because I did get cut off from my medication,
Right.
and then I ended up cutting ties with my dealer. So essentially, all the pain that I wasn't experiencing, all of a sudden I was experiencing, and then also experiencing withdrawals with that pain.
Right.
So it was very intense. It was a hard period of life just to get through, and basically I give myself credit now. At the time, I was very hard on myself and just really kind of continued to beat myself down each day. Where now I look at it and I'm just grateful I survived it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. And like you said, I think the feeling, the having the pain crash down on you at the same time as you're just trying to like move forward in sobriety, which by itself is enough, but then having the physical symptoms of the pain that you've not had to deal with up until that point really hit you must have felt like a wall of just like too much. You know what I mean?
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's funny you say that because there's actually a chapter in my book called Too Much.
Oh,
Um, and it's yeah, it basically talks about exactly what we just talked about and how it was all so overwhelming and all just it was so much to take on at once that I just felt buried by it all. And the only way to kind of deal with it was to isolate one piece of it at a time and try to just slowly rebuild and try to get some kind of foundation underneath me. And that took the better portion of a year just to kind of get to a point where on a daily basis I could say, I think I'm okay today, and
right,
I'm going to be able to do A, B, and C most likely, and at least take care of the most basics like the self care and things like that. Where even that became a challenge early on in sobriety. It was hard to even get out of bed, to want to go shower, to want to brush my teeth. All those things became extremely difficult at one point in time, but with time and just repetition, they became a little easier and just a little like more part of a normal routine
right.
once again.
And
So
I wish that that was like the end of the suffering for you, but there's another whole element to this story, which is really, really important for those who are watching to understand where Travis is coming from and why his story is so important. And it's not to say, I want to like interject and say, like, even if your story is not as intense of a story as what Travis experienced, all pain is pain, and
exactly.
your story was painful to you if it was painful to you. And I don't buy into like, I have people who come on the show who say, oh, I don't know if my story is like what you're looking for. What I'm looking for and what I want to talk to people about is their journey through adversity and their success, whatever that looks like. Like maybe that, and sounds like, and I've also been there too because I have depression. Like the day that you woke up and you took a shower that you didn't want to take a shower, that was a freaking victory. You know what I mean? Like brushing
Exactly.
your teeth when you don't feel like it, total victory. So just because Travis's story is intense, it's important to tell these stories because other people go through intense things and have to do it alone. Like Travis had to do this whole thing by himself. And so for other people who are experiencing similar things, it's important for them to hear Travis's story, but it's also important for you to hear this story because you have your own pain that you're going through alone and you have your own struggles that you're going through alone. And you need to know that success and victory and wins are accomplishments wherever they meet you in your life, and they don't, there's no like less than, greater than. We are all going through a series of successes and struggles. So I just wanted to interject there, but I do want to really move on to the next phase, which is Travis, you were on a path towards recovery, and then things kind of took a turn, right? And tell us a little bit about that.
They did. So I'm going to preface this with, at the time, I was also suffering from an undiagnosed mental health issue. I was eventually diagnosed bipolar, which for so long too, that played a role in terms of self-medicating and really just not necessarily understanding some of the way I thought and the way I would respond to certain situations. And one of those things was I had about a year sober. And they weren't great, but they were manageable. Like I was working in a restaurant, I was catering, I was barely making ends meet, but I was making ends meet. And one night I decided that I was going to go out and drink. And essentially I got to that point because I had gone almost 2 days without sleep. I was manic at the time. I didn't know I was manic, but that's what I now understand with my disease, that that's where I was at. And I went out, went to a bar, um, didn't use my drug of choice, but did have a handful plus of Long Island's between like midnight and the 2 o'clock bar close. Then after bar close, since the bar was only like a mile from my house, I decided that I would be okay to drive home, which I wasn't. On my way home, I crashed my car into a curb coming into the last turn into our neighborhood. Um, Got out of the vehicle, looked at the damage, tried to drive it off the curb, figured the vehicle wasn't operable. At around that time, I started feeling sick, ended up going to the side of the house that I crashed my car in front of, using the bathroom outside and throwing up. Then walked a few feet, got to about the driveway, felt like I was going to be sick again, leaned up against the car, and ended up setting off a car alarm. At that time, all hell broke loose. I should also preface it by saying our neighborhood was experiencing car break-ins that summer, and my vehicle had actually just been broken into like a week and a half prior. So the neighborhood was on high alert. So anyway, this neighbor who hears the car alarm comes outside, has a giant mag light in his hand. He's screaming obscenities. And basically I was like, well, what do I do? Do I run? Do I hide? I I don't know. So I tried to hide, and that doesn't work for me. I'm over 6 feet tall, usually weigh at about 220. At the time, I was probably closer to around 240 pounds. So I'm a big dude, and hiding just was not a good option. The guy saw me basically trying to hide behind a car. I opened the car door, slid in, locked the car, and he came over once again, shouting obscenities, saying how he caught me, how he was going to whoop my ass, things like that. I tried to explain to him, look, I'm a neighbor, I'm drunk, I just live up the street, I'm trying to go home. And he seemed to relax for a minute. And that's when I went to get out of the vehicle. At that time, the police report says I lunged at him. I know in my heart of hearts that I took a drunken stumble, and he saw that as an opportunity. So he beat me with the Maglite flashlight. I ended up with my skull fractured in 3 different places. Air had reached my brain cavity. I had a TBI, so traumatic brain injury, multiple contusions, a concussion on top of that. And basically, he beat me nearly to death. In the police report, it says when I was on the ground, he hit me one last time as hard as he could. And that's always kind of like stuck with me because I wasn't conscious at the time. So it was basically just added that, I guess, added that for to make the exclamation. But anyway, when I woke up, I was surrounded by police and EMS, and I was told that due to the extent of my injuries, I would have to be taken to the hospital. The first hospital they took me to could not deal with my injuries, so they took me to a second hospital, UW hospital, which I'm extremely grateful for today. Um, with a series of surgeries, they were able to put my face back together and expelled the air from my brain cavity. They monitored me for about 2 days for swelling of the brain because they were worried that might be an issue. I thankfully got through that time period without having my brain swell too much where I would have to have like a skull tap or something along those lines. And then right about the time where I thought I was gonna start like getting out of the bed, like moving, maybe take a shower, use the bathroom by myself, I was taken to jail, essentially, because when I decided to go out to drink, I was still on probation from the thefts at the time, and my probation was revoked. So I went from having experienced a traumatic brain injury to having surgeries over about a day and a half. And before I could even recover from the surgeries, I was taken directly to jail. Once I got to jail, it was deemed that I was not fit for general population. So they didn't have a medical wing at this jail. So their response was to put me into solitary confinement. So I spent the next 7 days in solitary confinement, trying to recover from the surgeries and basically just trying to pick up whatever pieces of my life were left. I should also say I couldn't speak very well at the time. I was suffering from aphasia. It's similar to what stroke patients go through. Like the words would just I could picture them in my head, but I couldn't get them out of my mouth. I'd just get stuck. I also lost my ability to write. I couldn't write my name, couldn't read either. So I had all these trials and tribulations that I had to figure out while I was in jail. So after 7 days in solitary, I was released to general population, and that's where I started my own kind of PT. Pretty much sounding out words, practicing writing my ABCs, like capital A, capital B, little b, kind of the same thing you do in early elementary school when you're working on your penmanship and just learning how to write words. I did all that, and slowly my handwriting came back. My speech slowly improved. That was probably the thing that took the longest. I still today will get stuck on certain words, and I'll struggle with them. But overall, it took about 6 months for me to really be comfortable writing again and just even be capable of holding a conversation with someone.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Where does karma come into this for you? Because that sounds like a funny question, but karma
Yeah.
is a dog. But tell me how this journey happens in healing for you and how that overlaps with the dog.
Sure. Well, I was in the heart of addiction. I got a call from my drug dealer saying that he knew basically of this dog that was chained to a tree. And it was out at this house that was kind of a trap house. I had never been there before, but I had heard of it, and it was known for drug dealing and potentially dog fighting. So I went out to this house to see what was going on with this dog, and essentially that's where I found Karma. Long story short, the owners were not taking care of her. She was extremely emaciated and pretty much on the brink of death when I found her. Instead of leaving her in that condition, I went to a local hardware store, got a bolt cutter, came back to the house, and ended up cutting her from the tree. That's when karma joined my life. At the time, I was still married. Brought her home, ended up lying to my wife and telling her that I got her from a guy at the gym who couldn't take care of her because I knew there was no way with one dog already at our house that she was going to welcome this animal into our home. So I made something up and ended up keeping Karma, taking her to the vet the next day. And that's really where like her recovery began. So as I was going downhill and kind of experiencing all these negatives in my life, I had Karma to basically be the opposite. She
Mm,
was the thing that I was putting all my time into,
kind of her rehab and just making sure that she was given the best potential possible, not only to survive, but hopefully to thrive. And that's pretty much how my relationship with Karma began. From that point, we became inseparable. She was my ride or die. I would take her on long walks and literally telling myself, be like, hey, I was really craving Oxy today. Like, I even thought about picking up and calling my dealer. Like, I would just be transparent with her because I couldn't be transparent with anyone else. And just developing that relationship where I had someone or something to talk to and then something to care about outside of myself was so huge because it kept me going.
Yeah.
It literally was like the only thing at times, like Karma was the only thing at times that I cared about enough to say, hey, I can't do it for myself today, but I can do it for her. So I'm going to give the best of myself to at least her, where otherwise don't feel capable of doing really much of anything. And that got me through a lot of days, countless days, to be honest with you.
Sounds like she really saved your life.
She did. She honestly did save my life. One time when I was really in a deep, dark depression, I uh, I was considering suicide to the point where I was starting to write a suicide letter. I had a tactical knife from when I protected the governor, and I was practicing stabbing myself between the ribs to hit my heart. So I had a couple hesitation like cuts where I like had lined it up, and I was pretty much getting ready to just make the plunge and end it. And Karma, in the time that I was doing that, came up to me and started nudging me and whining, and I was like, "Oh, baby girl, what do you need?" And she had to go outside. It was just enough to interrupt my train of thought that I was like, "Okay, I'll put the knife down, let her outside, and make sure she's taken care of." And in that time frame, while I was outside with her, I pretty much reevaluated and decided that, if I take my own life, who's going to watch over her? What's
Right.
going to happen? Um, and it gave me enough time to pause and really think about what I was about to do and the finality around that. And I decided that was not what I wanted at the time. So I came back inside, and instead of taking my life, I actually called my probation agent at the time and said, here's what went down. I think I need to go to the hospital and get some mental health help. And I ended up checking into the hospital that afternoon. So.
That's so good. That's so
Yeah.
good. What does life look like for you now in terms of what are you striving for? What does success look like for you now? In this current day, now that you are at least, I mean, nobody's ever recovered from these things, right? But we are more aware
Yeah.
of what our downfalls are and where our weaknesses are in terms of what can take us off track. So what does the new success look like for now that you've learned that it's not work or lifting or you know even any of the stuff in between, but what does it look like for you now?
Yeah, I would say, like I said before, it was very macro. Now it's super micro. I look at it like, okay, what can I do to be the best version of myself today? And that varies from day to day. Some days, like I said, I'm not that great. Like, I'll wake up, I'll be in a funk, I'll be struggling with depression, and that day success looks different than it does maybe on a day like today where I'm feeling great. I've got opportunities lined up. I've got things going on all day. So really, to me, success is just taking each day on its own and breaking it down into little manageable pieces. And then each time that I pretty much put a check in the box, counting one of those pieces as a small victory. Um, and just adding up those little victories by the end of the day. And if I put enough checks in enough boxes, I look at that as a successful day. As okay, I've done the best to my ability today to either better myself or better someone else. And that's my new definition of success.
I love that. I think I am a big proponent of like finding whatever your adult sticker chart is. You know what I mean? Like
Oh
we
yeah.
used to get the gold stars when we were younger, and we don't give ourselves enough gold stars. And that's kind of like the whole point of my book is like, I didn't write that in there. I should have. That would have been amazing. It's not too late. I'm in editing. I should maybe put it in there. But like, we need to find our adult sticker chart. Like, where do you give yourself a gold star? Like, and what's at the end of the gold stars? Like, what prize do you get at the end of the gold stars? Like, and it's not what you think it is, you know? And the end of the gold stars is actually the beginning of a whole new sticker chart. Like, it's this constant, you know, journey through things as we redefine what our life is and who's in our life and how we live our life. And you know, and as somebody who also deals with mental health issues, like hats off to you, because I also like have days where like my best looks like getting out of bed and walking around in my pajamas for a little bit, maybe brush my teeth and then get back in bed. Like full transparency, that's my best some days. And then I'm like, win, you know, like I put my 2 feet on the floor, that was enough for today, you know. And then there's days where I can just like you know, just slay, and then that's awesome, you know. But you know, we all have this little like in between. And so yeah, I want to say thank you so much for sharing your story. I know that um I know that it was hard for you to tell that story in the book. But I think it's so important for people to hear. And I, again, to the audience, I would just say, please don't hesitate. Just buy My Life with Karma, Travis Sackett, just Travis Sackett book. It will pop up, I promise. And buy it on Kindle, or buy the, you know, even better, buy the paperback, have it shipped to you. It's Prime. It's good. Come on, people. But it's a story that will change your life in the way that it is told, because it really did change Travis's life. So thank you so much for sharing with us today, and for sharing with me, because I got the pleasure of hearing the story twice, but in different ways too. So I was really touched by it. So I thank you so much.
Well, thank you again for having me on, and thank you for mentioning that too, that like with your best, I mean, I think we all try to hold ourselves up to such a high standard each day.
Yes,
And let's be real, sometimes that standard is just it's ridiculous.
it
And
is.
I think if we can look at it and be like, okay, what's actually meaningful in what I'm doing today, and what truly matters compared to what I think matters, I think we can find that happy medium place where you're still being productive, you're still getting done what you need to get done, but you're also giving yourself gratitude and love and saying, okay, I've accomplished A, B, and C, but I've also done these other things that may not seem like that big of a deal to someone, but to me they were huge today. And just taking that all in and realizing that it all matters and it all means something. I think that's huge. So thank you too for sharing your portion of that, because I think that's what people need to hear is we're not always going to be our best every day, and that's okay.
Yeah. Well, because that day, that was our best.
Exactly. Thank you.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That day, that was our best. And so it was enough. And that
Yep.
we have to allow it to be enough.
Exactly.
And that's the struggle. It's less about what, like, we think it's about what everybody else thinks. It's right here. It's what we think. And we don't allow it to be enough. And we have to fight the battle to allow it to be enough.
Exactly. And I think like while we're fighting that battle too, it's so important, like I said, to just be kind to ourselves,
Yes.
because it's so easy to beat yourself up and say, "Hey, look at what I didn't accomplish today," as opposed to reframing it and saying, "Look at all these great things that I actually was able to do for myself or for my mental health or for someone else." Like there's so many different ways that you can be grateful and show gratitude that I think sometimes it gets lost because we are too hard on ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I don't think this is the end of you and I think we'll have other collaborations in the future. I definitely enjoyed our talk today, and thanks again for joining us for this show.
Yeah, thank you so much again for having me on, and thank you for plugging the book too. I
Yeah,
appreciate that.
absolutely. It's
So,
important. People need to read it. So,
yeah,
okay, everybody, thank you so much for joining us for Successful as Fuck with your host, Ryan Gonzalez. Join us tomorrow. We're also going to have another badass author, Lisa Randolph, Lisa Randolph with us tomorrow, and another cool story of success and overcoming adversity. So that's it for us today. Thanks, guys.
awesome. Thank you again.